Kidnapping of the President of the Republic by the government of the United States of America, which constitutes a direct violation of an essential norm of the international legal order.
We firmly condemn the U.S. act of armed aggression against Venezuela.
Colleagues, the United States successfully carried out a surgical law enforcement operation.
The power of the law must prevail.
China is deeply shocked by and strongly condemns the unilateral, illegal, and bullying acts of the U.S.
An emergency meeting of the United Nations Security Council, a sitting president seized in his own capital, and the United States calling it law enforcement, not war. The Security Council confronted one explosive question: did the U.S. just break the UN Charter, or enforce it? This video breaks down what was said, what was not said, and why this moment could reshape how power is exercised in the international system. The United States ambassador told the Council that this was not a war, not an invasion, but a surgical law enforcement operation.
This law enforcement action was directed consistent with the President of the United States' responsibility as Commander-in-Chief to protect Americans at home and abroad against a fugitive who is directly responsible for narcoterrorism that has killed hundreds of thousands of Americans and created destabilizing violence throughout our hemisphere.
Washington claims that Nicolás Maduro was already under U.S. indictment for narcotics trafficking and that decades-old charges justify the operation. Venezuela's ambassador rejected that framing entirely, calling it a kidnapping of a head of state.
If the kidnapping of a head of state, the bombing of a sovereign country, and the open threat of further armed action are tolerated or downplayed, the message sent to the world is a devastating one, namely that the law is optional and that force is the true arbiter of international relations.
Russia went further, describing the operation as armed aggression.
And if this response is sincere, if it is principled, then perhaps the U.S. leadership, too, which openly is asserting intention to run another country for the benefit of the United States, they will perhaps glance at their own constitution, their constitution of the United States, which begins with the words, "We the people of the United States," and will begin, in fact, to recognize the sovereignty of other states rather than deposing inconvenient regimes.
Colombia warned this could destabilize an entire region, long defined as a zone of peace.
These actions that we have seen remind us of the worst interference in our area in the past, in our zone of peace. And it calls to mind the commitment that we have as states to resolve our differences peacefully through dialogue and negotiation or other forms of peaceful settlement, in full accordance with international law and with its instruments to which we have subscribed at the hemispheric and regional levels, such as the Charter of the Organization of American States.
The most careful and arguably most important words came from the UN Secretariat itself.
Remain deeply concerned that rules of international law have not been respected with regard to the 3 January military action. The Charter enshrines the prohibition of the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state. The maintenance of international peace and security depends on the continued commitment of all member states to adhere to all the provisions of the Charter. Mr. President, Venezuela has experienced decades of internal instability and social and economic turmoil. Democracy has been undermined. Millions of its people have fled the country. The situation is critical, but it is still possible to prevent a wider and more destructive conflagration.
No country was named, no verdict was issued, but the message was clear. International law already has tools to deal with drugs, resources, and human rights without force. Economist Jeffrey Sachs sharpened the warning.
In the past month, President Trump has issued direct threats against 6 UN member states, including Colombia, Denmark, Iran, Mexico, Nigeria, and of course, Venezuela.
The Council, he said, is not here to judge Maduro, but to defend the Charter itself. Then came the most revealing exchange.
You cannot continue to have the largest energy reserves in the world under the control of adversaries of the United States, under the control of illegitimate leaders, and not benefiting the people of Venezuela, and stolen by a handful of oligarchs inside of Venezuela.
Venezuela responded by naming what it sees as the real motive: control over resources.
Mr. President, we cannot ignore a central element of this US aggression. Venezuela is the victim of these attacks because of its natural resources.
Oil, energy, strategic geography. This is the oldest argument in global politics. Is force being used to enforce law or to reshape power? If a powerful state can seize a sitting president abroad based on its own indictments, what stops others from doing the same? That question, more than Maduro himself, is what shook the Security Council today.